Hey guys, I want to take a minute and talk to you about real world experience. And a lot of times in this particular environment, particularly in the tactical realm, we see real world experience being elevated to a level that it supersedes everything else. I wanted to give you a no BS assessment of real world experience, how it applies, how it can benefit you, and things like that. And particularly for you guys who are looking for instructors or trainers or anything like this for whatever field, whether it be combatives or firearms or whatever it is, medical, whatever it is you're looking for, how to go about discerning whether or not an individual is just simply using real world experience as a marketing tool, or whether or not that real world experience is actually applicable and beneficial to you as a student. So not all real world experience is created equally here. So the first thing that I want to do here, and we're just going to use, since you guys are probably more familiar with the firearms industry and kind of hierarchy and training and so on and so forth, we're going to go ahead and just use that as an example, but we'll talk about how combatives relates to that as well. So the first thing that we have is when we start coming into firearms training, the first thing that you're going to go to is you're going to go to marksmanship training. Okay, this is where you learn the basic fundamentals of how to snap in, things like grip, trigger control, reset, bone support, all these things. You're going to learn all of these basic fundamental ideas, sight picture, things like that, breathing. From there, this would be kind of your boot camp phase. All right, this is where you learn all of this. For you guys with military backgrounds or law enforcement, this would be your initial training phase, and this is where you get this information is that basic marksmanship training. From there, depending on maybe your MOS or if you're in law enforcement, you probably would kind of stop in this area unless you went to a specialized unit. But from there, depending on your MOS in the military, maybe you would go to advanced marksmanship training. And this is where maybe they start instituting things like moving targets, pop-ups, things like this. Maybe some target discrimination, so they'll put some paper up there with shoot, no shoot scenarios, things like that. And you'll start getting into more of the advanced marksmanship training. Maybe they'll do some situations like immediate action drills, things like that, clearing malfunctions, beyond the basic clearing stuff that you learned in regular marksmanship training. So from there, depending on, again, your MOS and what level you're at, maybe your unit goes to an advanced school where you're going to have passive resistance. This would be force-on-force training, and understand that the force-on-force training is different from like an unscripted result. Typically when we start off actual resistance type training, it's passive resistance. And what that means is that we'll put an OP4 in a room, and as I come into the room, even if I'm shot, I'm just going to continue moving through with the assignment, and I'm going to continue drawing down, and then afterwards we'll kind of hot wash that situation and we'll say what I did right, what I did wrong, did I get shot, did I catch all the targets, things like that. And the whole point is to gradually build up the level of resistance that I'm experiencing. So I went from basically shooting paper to target discrimination. Now I'm shooting actual individuals who are potentially shooting back, and then again, depending on your level and depending on what MOS you're in, maybe you'll move up to active resistance. And this is where you actually start getting into win and lose scenarios. So it's my team pitted against another team. So my job is to come in and actually take down a structure. Now, this would actually, depending on what schools you're going to, this might be a final training exercise at the end of a scenario where I actually come in and I've gone through all of these, and now for the FTX, I'm coming in and I'm actually going to take all of the skills that I've learned and I'm going to put it in a real world training type scenario where if I'm shot, I go down and my team goes on without me, or maybe they have to deal with how to triage that situation, things like this. So understand that there is a progressive level of understanding, starting at the boot camp level and moving all the way up to like the special operations level. This is the training track, okay? Now, what I want you to understand is that real-world experience is down here and is completely irrelevant to the training track. Real-world experience, there are individuals who come out, depending on their MOS, or if you're in law enforcement, you go and you do your firearms training, you graduate, and then you go and you're assigned to an FTO, and then you're out on the street, you're working. So right from marksmanship training, you go straight to real-world experience. Okay? Right from, maybe you're there for a couple of years, maybe you go through boot camp, and let's say your MOS is maybe in an infantry field, so you do actually move on to maybe some advanced marksmanship training and stuff like that. So from advanced marksmanship training, your unit gets deployed, and that's where you actually get real-world experience. Let's say you're there for a while, maybe you didn't deploy, your unit was out of cycle or something, your unit didn't deploy, you went to do some higher level training where you're doing more force on force, and then your unit deploys, and this is where you're going to get some passive resistance training. Let's say you go on up to Special Forces selection and you're there, you go through all of your training, you're doing all of this, and it's at that point, pen's getting a little dry here, at that point that you get active resistance training. Now here's the thing that I want you to understand. Regardless of what training block you were in, you can get real-world experience from any one of these levels. Now what that means is that means that regardless of how much training you have, if you as a student are going on the internet and you're looking for instructors and the first thing that they're saying is, hey, I've got real-world experience, I've deployed this many times, 2 deployments to Iraq and this and that, or whatever. My question is, because the information that you are seeking from this guy is not war stories about what happened. The information you're seeking from an instructor is, what can he pass on to you? Now, real-world experience is something that is important. But what real-world experience does is it validates what information you have based on what training block you were able to achieve. So a guy who got straight out of boot camp, he went and was assigned to Motor T, and then he gets deployed, and he comes out, and the first thing that he does is he starts a tactical school and says, hey, I've got real-world experience. Guys, understand that the level of training you're going to get is this, because he's never gotten any of this. He never got to the point of being able to do those things. By the same token, you go, and I'm not taking anything away from anybody, you should train with anybody who is at a higher level than you are. So if you're going to go seek training from a guy whose highest level of training was basic marksmanship, and you're not at that level, then there's certainly something that you can benefit there. But if you're looking for a more advanced understanding of firearms and utilization and things like that, understand that if all you're doing is looking in this real-world experience category, there is no telling what you're going to get. There are guys who deployed to Kuwait, okay? Non-combat zone for all intents and purposes. There are guys who deployed and maybe they went to, maybe they were contractors and they went to Croatia, Camp Bondsteel, something like that. They went over there to Europe, and technically they deployed like in that sense, but not really in a combat zone. All right? Understand that real-world experience is not created equal. All right? By the same token, when we start getting into things like combatives, just because you deployed doesn't mean you ever put hands on anybody. Okay? When we're talking about combatives, especially as it relates to you as a civilian, understand that it's not going to be in the same context. It's not going to be in the same environment. If I deployed 8 times to Iraq and I was assigned to a combat unit and we went in and did all these things and so on and so forth, chances are, I always had at least 3 to 4 other guys with me anytime I went into a building. Okay? That means that help was always a few seconds away. So I enter into a room, I'm immediately confronted with a guy who snatches a hold of my muzzle and forces it down, and now I'm in this kind of combative situation. The training methodology is to basically hold off until guys can get there, or to deal with the threat. Those are the two different paradigms that are taught. However, how does that relate to you as a civilian? Well, 50% of that paradigm doesn't even apply to you at all, because the reality is nobody is coming to help you. Chances are everybody that is going to be there to see you get abducted, or to see you mugged or raped or whatever, anybody who's going to be there is just simply going to film it and put it on YouTube. Nobody's going to actually physically help you in most cases. So understand that. The real world experience that you get, it has to be filtered through what level of training the teacher had achieved and what he was able to accomplish in that real world experience. Guys, when we're talking about like private military contractors, contractors overseas, when I was overseas, there were guys there that were firefighters. There were guys there that were IT professionals. There were guys there that basically worked mess duty, that were contractors. Technically, they could print a resume and say, hey, I deployed to Afghanistan for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, whatever. But what did you do? What was your job? How does it relate to what it is that I'm learning? Okay? I'm not taking anything away from anybody in any field. What I'm trying to pass on is that more important than basically just coming down here and saying real world experience, because it's basically a selling quote, more important than that is what information can you pass on to me, and is it relevant to the environment that I'm dealing with? If I'm not dealing with the same environment, if I don't have 3 to 4 other guys constantly behind me in a stack going into a room, and it's basically just me and my wife living at home, or if it's basically just me by myself, how does your real world experience relate to me? Did you actually have any real world experience where you were one-on-one, one-on-two type situations where you had to deal with this? All right? If you didn't, then you don't have real world experience that is relevant to me. All right? Because those are the realities that I'm going to be dealing with in the civilian world, things like that. So I want you guys to apply that, because the question that I'm always asked is, how do you go about vetting an instructor? And the first thing that you don't do is go to a resume. All right? That should not be the first thing. I tell guys all the time, don't look at what the instructor has done. Look at who's listening to him. All right? That's what's important. Because there are guys out there with absolutely no military, no law enforcement, even no operational experience, that the military values their opinion. You look at guys like Rob Latham. Okay? You look at various different guys who have a wealth of knowledge in their particular environment, but don't have any real world operational experience of any kind, whether domestic or overseas. And yet, even those guys who are working in operational capacities, they still look at them and they're like, you know what? That guy has something to say. Based on my experience, I'm taking what he's saying and I'm filtering it through my actual field experience, and I'm saying, yeah, that's relevant, that's important. So you can't always look at the resume of the individual. You have to look at the individuals that are listening to that individual, if that makes any sense to you. So that's one way that you can kind of go about vetting instructors. Another way is to look at their training track. What did they get up to? I don't really care. I'll shut this thing off. I don't really care if this guy had 9 tours in Iraq as a cook. I don't really care. However, most people on the internet are just going to simply skim through some bio and stuff and say, well, he's got 9 deployments to Iraq or whatever. But doing what? Is it relevant to what I'm doing? even somebody at the higher special operations level may not be relevant to what you're doing. You have to be honest with that. Am I actually training for just an entertainment experience, or am I training for actual use? Am I training because it's a felt need? If you're training for just entertainment, by all means, go and do all the rappelling and all the, combat rolls and tomahawk throws and all that stuff all you want. Knock yourself out. But I mean, if it's entertainment, it's entertainment. Have as much fun as you like. But if you're actually training because of a perceived need, I'm training because my environment is getting more hostile and I want to be able to be equipped to deal with that, then look at which environment you're in. Look at how whoever you're training with, how their experience and background can benefit you, and then apply it. And then that's the instructor that you choose. If you're military, law enforcement, if you're SWAT or something like that, there is absolutely a need for you to maybe seek out somebody who's kicked down doors, who's done things like that, because that could quite possibly be in your job description. If you're a civilian who really would never have to be in those situations, understand that there's nothing wrong with you going and training that stuff. And I'm not saying that there's some things that you might not be able to benefit from, but by and large, to spend a great amount of money on doing something that in reality you will never ever have the opportunity to do, you just have to be honest with yourself. You're training for entertainment purposes. You're training to kind of make yourself feel good. You're training for just the experience. You're not really training. Well, you're not really training at all, to be honest with you. So I want you to just kind of look at that, kind of keep this in mind, because this particular model applies to everything as well. It applies to even combatives. So a guy, he takes like level 1 combatives in boot camp. And he goes and deploys, and he comes back, and the first thing that he does is he starts saying, hey, I'm a level 1 combatives instructor, and I can teach you because I have real world experience. That's awesome. You have the equivalent of about 8 training hours under your belt. Advanced marksmanship training, that might be, this guy, he gets up to tan belt or brown belt or green belt or whatever, in McMap, level 2, level 3, level 4, whatever. You start going through the different levels, and this guy is level 2 and he's got real world experience. Understand, you're getting about 16 hours of cumulative training hours poured into you. That's it. Okay? Level 3, level 4. Level 4 at the highest level of MACP, you're getting 40 hours of cumulative training that was poured into him. Now that doesn't mean that he didn't train on his own elsewhere, but that information is more relevant to me than just the fact that he achieved 40 hours of training in MACP. Okay? I'm not saying that one thing is better than another. What I'm trying to get you to do is be honest about what it is that you're going to get. Because if all you're doing is looking down here at real world experience, then you'll never get to the point where you're actually evaluating what it is you're going to be taught. Level 1 guys is 8 hours of training. Level 4 guys is 40 hours of training that they received. 40 hours. Okay? That's the equivalent of you signing up and paying X amount of dollars to have some white belt teach you in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, just for instance. Okay? If you want to pay that kind of money, you knock yourself out. But understand that the difference between 40 hours of training to get to the highest level of MACP and 10 years, 15 years of cumulative constant training to get to the highest levels of just BJJ, for example, there's no comparison. All right, it's the equivalent of a participation award versus a PhD degree. Okay, you have to be honest about what it is that you're dealing with and what you're signing up for, and ask yourself, does it apply to your environment? What information can this individual pass on to me, and is it relevant to me? If it's not, I don't care what kind of real world experience he has. If he's just here, it doesn't make any difference. So I want you guys to think about that. Real world experience is not bad, but it's not all that you should be looking at. All right? So you guys train hard.